The auction house was packed, buzzing with the excitement of buyers looking for their next prized horse. Wealthy bidders raised their paddles, eager to claim the strongest, fastest, and most elegant creatures. But in the farthest corner, almost hidden from sight, stood a horse no one wanted. His coat was dull, his ribs visible beneath thin skin, and his eyes lifeless. No one gave him a second glance. No one saw potential in him. Until a young man stepped forward. And what happened next left everyone speechless. The sharp crack of the auctioneer's gavel echoed through the crowded hall. Horses were paraded one by one, their coats gleaming under the dim lights, their muscles rippling with power. Buyers whispered, calculating worth in their minds. Prices soared, fortunes exchanged hands. Next up, Lot 47. A hush fell over the room. The mood shifted. Lot 47 was not like the others. A tall, thin gelding was led into the center of the auction ring. His hooves dragged against the ground as if every step was an effort. His coat, once a rich brown, was now dull and scarred. His ribs jutted out sharply, a sign of past neglect. He didn't stand proudly like the other horses. He didn't toss his mane or stomp in defiance. He just stood, head low, defeated. The auctioneer cleared his throat, glancing at the crowd with hesitation. Even he knew this horse was a lost cause. Untrained gelding, injuries from past mistreatment, will need care and patience, he announced, though his tone lacked conviction. Starting bid at $50. Silence. People shifted in their seats. Some chuckled, others shook their heads. He's worthless. Not even fit for farm work. Probably won't last the winter. The auctioneer tried again. 40? Nothing. The air grew thick with disinterest. Buyers turned away, already focused on the next prize stallion. Stable owners whispered among themselves, unwilling to waste money on an animal that wouldn't bring them profit. The horse, as if sensing the rejection, let out a soft exhale, a sound so faint, yet filled with something unmistakable: resignation. For him, this was just another moment of being unwanted. The auctioneer sighed, raising his gavel to move on. No bids, we'll take him back. I'll take him. A single voice cut through the noise. Heads turned, eyes widened. At the back of the room stood a young man, no older than 20. His clothes were simple, worn from years of work. He had no family name that carried weight, no riches to flaunt. But his eyes held something the others didn't: compassion. The auctioneer hesitated. You sure, son? He's in rough shape. I'm sure, the young man said, without hesitation. A murmur swept through the crowd. Some laughed under their breath. Others shook their heads in pity. Waste of money. That horse will break him before he can fix it. But the young man didn't waver. He stepped forward, his gaze never leaving the gelding. And for the first time since stepping into that auction ring, the rejected horse lifted his head just slightly, as if drawn to the stranger who saw him differently. The gavel slammed down. Sold. And just like that, the forgotten horse had a home. No one knew it yet, but what happened next would leave them all speechless. The rain poured as the young man led his newly bought horse through the muddy road. Thunder rumbled in the distance, but he didn't slow down. His grip on the worn rope was firm, yet gentle. He could feel the horse's hesitation with every step. The gelding, whom he had decided to name Rust, walked with a sluggish, uncertain gait. His ears twitched at every sound, his eyes darting around, searching for threats. He was used to fear, used to pain, and used to being abandoned. Liam, the young man, glanced down at him. You're safe now, he whispered. Rust didn't react. He had heard too many empty promises in his lifetime. When they reached the small family farm, Liam opened the wooden gate, leading Rust inside. The other horses in the pasture lifted their heads, watching curiously. Their coats were thick and healthy, their eyes bright. Rust, standing among them, looked like a shadow of what he could have been. Liam sighed. He knew this wouldn't be easy. A horse that didn't trust Rust didn't step into the stable when Liam guided him toward the open stall. He planted his hooves firmly in the wet dirt, nostrils flaring. His body tensed, as if expecting to be struck. Liam didn't push him. Instead, he unhooked the lead rope and stepped back, giving Rust space to decide for himself. The other horses were inside their stalls, munching on fresh hay, warm and comfortable. Rust stood outside in the cold rain, eyes darting between the stable and the open field. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he took a single step forward, then another. When he finally crossed the threshold, Liam let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. Small victories. That's all he needed to focus on. He set a fresh bucket of water inside Rust's stall and left him alone for the night. No expectations, no force, just time. The first touch of kindness. The next morning, Liam entered the stable quietly. Rust was curled in the corner, his legs tucked beneath him. At the sound of footsteps, he tensed, ready to flee. But when he saw it was just Liam, he relaxed, just a little. Liam sat down outside the stall, leaning his back against the wooden railing. He didn't speak, didn't move, he just sat. Minutes passed, then an hour. Rust's ears flicked. He didn't understand. Humans always demanded something: work, obedience, submission. But this one, he just sat there, as if he had nowhere else to be. Finally, Liam reached into his pocket and pulled out a small apple. He set it gently on the ground, just inside the stall, before leaning back again. Rust eyed it warily. He sniffed the air, nostrils flaring. Hunger gnawed at him, but hesitation held him still. Was this a trick? After several long minutes, Rust stretched his neck forward, lips barely brushing the fruit. He jerked back. No punishment came. He tried again. This time, he took a small bite. Then another. Liam smiled. Good boy. It was the first time anyone had called him that. Healing takes time. Days passed, turning into weeks. Every morning, Liam followed the same routine. He entered the stable, sat quietly, and waited. Some days, Rust would move closer. Other days, he stayed in the corner, lost in memories of the past. But Liam never lost patience. He spoke to Rust in soft tones, never raising his voice. He moved slowly, never making sudden gestures. And little by little, Rust started to trust. The first time he allowed Liam to brush his coat, it was hesitant, tense. But as the bristles moved gently over his back, he exhaled, as if realizing for the first time that touch didn't always mean pain. The first time Liam placed his hand against Rust's neck, the gelding stiffened, but didn't pull away. Trust wasn't built in a day, but it was growing. And for the first time in his life, Rust wasn't just surviving, he was healing. The morning sun stretched across the fields, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange. A soft breeze rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of fresh hay and damp earth. Inside the stable, Liam stood by Rust's stall, watching the gelding carefully. It had been weeks since he brought Rust home, and progress had been slow but steady. Rust no longer flinched at every movement. He no longer cowered in the corner, expecting pain. But trust was a delicate thing, and Liam knew that even one wrong move could break everything they had built. Today was an important day. Liam had decided it was time to take Rust out of the stable. Not just to the fenced paddock, but beyond. He wanted Rust to feel the open space, the freedom he had never known. But the question remained, would Rust allow it? A step into the unknown. Liam entered the stall with calm, deliberate movements. Rust lifted his head, his deep brown eyes watching him closely. He was still wary, still guarded, but something had changed in him. Liam held out his hand, palm open, showing Rust he had nothing to fear. "Come on, buddy," he murmured. "Let's take a walk." Rust hesitated. The past clung to him like a shadow, whispering that humans couldn't be trusted. But Liam had never hurt him, never forced him. And so, after a long pause, Rust took a single step forward. Liam smiled, clipping the lead rope onto Rust's halter. Slowly, he led him out of the stable. The sunlight touched Rust's coat, highlighting the scars along his body. He blinked at the brightness, ears flicking as he listened to the sounds of the farm. The chirping of birds, the distant neighs of other horses, the gentle rustling of leaves. For a moment, he stood frozen. Then Liam gave the rope a light tug, encouraging him. Rust took another step, and another. They walked together toward the open field, moving slowly but surely. Every now and then, Rust would stop, his muscles tensing as if expecting something to go wrong. But every time, Liam waited. He never pulled, never forced. And Rust, for the first time, started to believe that maybe, just maybe, he was safe. The first touch of freedom. When they reached the open paddock, Liam unhooked the lead rope. Rust stood still, confused. No restraints, no commands, no harsh yanks on the rope. Liam stepped back, giving him space. "Go on," he encouraged softly. "You're free." Rust didn't move at first. His life had always been about control, others deciding where he could go, what he could do. He had never known what it was like to just be. Then, ever so cautiously, he took a few steps forward. The grass beneath his hooves felt soft, unfamiliar. He sniffed the air, ears flicking, and then he ran. It wasn't a graceful gallop. His legs were still weak from years of neglect, but it was freedom. Liam watched, his heart swelling with pride. The broken, rejected horse from the auction was finally tasting what it meant to live. Rust's hooves pounded against the earth, his mane flying in the wind. For the first time in his life, he wasn't running from something. He was running for something. And in that moment, he wasn't just a scarred, unwanted horse. He was strong. He was alive. A test of trust. As the sun began to set, Liam approached Rust again. The gelding was breathing heavily from his run, but there was something different in his posture now. He stood taller, prouder. Liam reached out, brushing his fingers along Rust's neck. The horse didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned into the touch. Liam felt a lump rise in his throat. It wasn't just a moment, it was trust. Slowly, he brought out a saddle, resting it nearby. He wasn't going to force Rust to accept it today, but he wanted him to see it, to know it wasn't a threat. Rust eyed it warily, taking a cautious step closer. He sniffed the leather, his ears twitching. Liam didn't move, letting him explore at his own pace. Then, to his surprise, Rust nudged the saddle gently. It wasn't full acceptance, not yet, but it was a start, and for Liam, that was enough, a bond that couldn't be broken. As the stars began to appear in the night sky, Liam sat beside Rust in the open field. The silence between them wasn't empty, it was full of understanding. Rust was no longer just a broken horse. He was healing. He was learning to trust. And for the first time, he had something he had never known before. A friend. What happened next would prove just how strong their bond truly was. The wind howled through the valley, carrying the scent of distant rain. Dark clouds loomed overhead, promising a storm. Liam stood at the fence, watching Rust in the pasture. The once broken and lifeless gelding now stood tall, his coat no longer dull, but rich with color. His muscles had started to return, and his eyes no longer carried the weight of his past. He was changing, healing. But trust was fragile, and that trust was about to be tested in a way no one could have expected. A storm approaches. Liam had spent weeks gaining Rust's trust. Every day was a step forward, small but important. Rust now followed him without hesitation, allowed his touch, and even stood still as Liam gently placed a saddle on his back. But today, something felt different. The air was heavy, charged with the electricity of an incoming storm. The other horses in the pasture were uneasy, shifting on their hooves, ears flicking in all directions. Rust, too, was restless. He paced near the fence, his body tense. Liam knew storms could bring back memories, loud noises, flashes of light. They were reminders of past pain, of fear, of moments where Rust had no control. As the first raindrop fell, Liam decided to bring the horses into the stable. He grabbed Rust's lead rope and approached him slowly. "Come on, buddy. Let's get inside before it gets bad." But Rust didn't move. Lightning split the sky, followed by a deep, rolling thunder. Rust flinched, his breathing quickening. His muscles trembled beneath his coat. Liam reached out to soothe him. But then, a loud crack echoed through the valley. A tree in the distance snapped under the force of the wind, crashing to the ground with a deafening boom. Rust panicked, the fight or flight instinct. His instincts took over. His eyes went wild, nostrils flaring as his body screamed for escape. He yanked the rope from Liam's hands, his hooves digging into the mud as he bolted. "Rust, no!" Liam shouted, running after him. But Rust was lost to fear. He ran blindly, hooves pounding against the earth. The storm raged above, rain pouring down in sheets, turning the ground into a slick, dangerous mess. Liam sprinted after him, his heart pounding. He couldn't lose him, not after everything. Rust ran toward the open field, but the fence stopped him. He reared back, eyes darting for another escape route. Lightning flashed, and in his panic, he turned, straight toward the ravine at the edge of the property. Liam's blood ran cold. "No, no, no, Rust, stop!" But Rust didn't hear him. The past had trapped him in its grip, dragging him back to the days when pain was the only thing he knew. And then, it happened. His hoof slipped on the wet ground, his legs buckled, and he tumbled into the ravine. The fall that changed everything. Liam felt his heart shatter as he watched Rust disappear over the edge. Without thinking, without hesitation, he ran. His boots skidded in the mud as he reached the edge of the ravine, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Below, Rust lay still. For a moment, fear strangled Liam's chest. But then, Rust moved, a slow, painful twitch of his legs. His breathing was heavy, labored. He was alive. Liam scrambled down the steep incline, mud coating his hands as he fought to keep his balance. When he finally reached Rust's side, the gelding let out a weak, shaky breath. His eyes, though filled with fear, locked onto Liam's. "I'm here, buddy. I'm not leaving you." Rust was hurt. His legs trembled as he tried to rise, but failed. He was exhausted, his body pushed beyond its limits. Liam knew they couldn't stay there. The rain was coming down harder, and the ravine could flood. He had to get Rust out, now. But Rust had to trust him completely. A choice that defined their bond. Liam knelt beside Rust, running his hands over his neck, speaking in the same soft voice he had used since the beginning. "I need you to trust me, Rust. Just this once. Let me help you." Rust's ears flicked. He was afraid, but something in Liam's voice, something steady, something sure, made him pause. Liam grabbed the lead rope, wrapping it around Rust's neck. "Come on, buddy. You can do this." Slowly, painfully, Rust pushed himself onto his knees. His legs wobbled, his body shaking. Liam kept his hands on him, reassuring him with every breath. Then, with one final push, Rust stood. Liam felt tears sting his eyes. "That's it. That's my boy." The climb up was brutal. Liam guided Rust step by step, never letting go of the rope, never letting fear take over. Rain blinded them, the ground slipping beneath their feet. But together, they moved forward. When they finally reached the top, Rust collapsed onto solid ground, his sides heaving. Liam dropped to his knees beside him, resting his forehead against Rust's. His hands trembled as he whispered, "You did it." And for the first time since the storm began, Rust leaned into him, his body pressing against Liam's as if saying, "I trust you." A moment no one could forget. The storm raged on, but it no longer mattered, because in that moment, Liam and Rust weren't just a boy and a horse. They were something stronger. They were family. And what happened next would prove that nothing could break them. The morning after the storm was calm, almost eerily so. The sky was painted in soft shades of blue and pink, the air still damp from the heavy rain. Birds sang in the distance, their melodies gentle, as if the world itself was trying to heal from the chaos of the night before. Liam sat outside Rust's stall, his back resting against the wooden fence. His clothes were still stained with mud, his muscles sore from the struggle of getting Rust out of the ravine. He exhaled, rubbing his hands together, exhausted but relieved. Inside the stall, Rust stood quietly, watching him. His body still carried the signs of last night's terror. His legs were weak, his coat was still damp, and his breathing, though steady, was slower than usual. But there was something different in his eyes, something that hadn't been there before. Trust. For the first time, Rust didn't flinch when Liam moved. He didn't back away when the stable door creaked open. He simply stood there, waiting. Liam stepped inside, his heart full of something indescribable. He reached out, brushing his fingers gently against Rust's neck. The horse sighed, pressing his head lightly against Liam's chest. It was the first time Rust had initiated touch. Liam swallowed the lump in his throat, letting his fingers trail over Rust's mane. "We made it, buddy," he whispered. "You and me." Rust didn't pull away. He didn't hesitate. He simply stood there, trusting. Healing takes time, but it's worth it. Over the next few weeks, Rust's recovery was slow but steady. Liam took care of him like he was the most valuable horse in the world, ensuring his wounds healed properly and his strength returned. But the biggest change wasn't in Rust's body, it was in his heart. The horse that once refused human touch now followed Liam everywhere. When Liam walked through the pasture, Rust was always a few steps behind. When Liam sat in the grass, Rust would lower his head, resting his muzzle gently against his shoulder. Their bond had transformed. It was no longer built on fear, hesitation, or uncertainty. It was built on something unshakable: trust, loyalty, and love. One evening, as the golden sunset bathed the farm in warm light, Liam decided it was time. He stood in front of Rust with a saddle in hand. This time, he wasn't just showing it, he was asking a question. Rust watched him, ears flicking. Then, slowly, deliberately, he stepped forward. He didn't shy away, when Liam placed the saddle on his back. He didn't flinch when the girth was tightened. He simply stood still, calm and accepting. Liam's chest tightened with emotion. This wasn't just a broken horse, learning to be ridden again. This was a soul who had finally found trust. And as Liam swung onto Rust's back, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing beneath him, he realized something. Rust hadn't just been saved. He had saved Liam too. The ride that changed everything. Liam guided Rust toward the open pasture, letting him set the pace. For the first few minutes, they moved slowly, cautiously. Rust was still getting used to the idea of a rider again. But then, something magical happened. Rust lifted his head, ears pricked forward. A breeze swept through the valley, rustling the grass. And suddenly, as if something deep within him had, sometimes, all it takes is one person to believe in you, to change your story forever. Watch till the end, because you won't want to miss this journey.